Good morning, everyone. Welcome and thank you for attending. We're just got a few more people that are joining right now. We're gonna hold for about 3 minutes here, let the people who are logging in get settled in. So we're just gonna hold on here for a moment. But thank you for your patience. Okay, looks like we got some more people who are logging in. Thank you, everybody. We're gonna get started here now. Thanks again for attending today's webinar. We appreciate your attendance. My name is Dave Kluger. I'm Principal Technology Architect at Storcom. So we have created this series of webinars, so we want to try to help people kind of sift through the clutter of email in their inbox about the topic of remote workforce and remote work options. We felt it was kind of time to put on a webinar of our own to help you sort through this information coming from a more vendor agnostic standpoint. The purpose of this was to help you kind of sift through what was fact and fiction. A lot of the stuff that we've seen out there comes from a definite marketing standpoint of one vendor's point of view, and it didn't really have a lot of what I call meat to it. So what we did was come up with a presentation that we think kind of dives into some of the questions that you really need to be asking to figure out, if you're going to deploy a remote workforce via a solution like virtual desktop, and we're going to go into why we think that's a benefit. What are the things you need to look into? As I've said, this is a 3-part series we're going to be doing today: virtual desktop and remote work options. Next, we're going to be going into securing your remote workforce, whether it's via VDI or whether it's just users on laptops with VPNs, et cetera. What things you need to be thinking about. Lastly, we're going to go into a session talking about collaboration, whether it's cloud file sharing options like OneDrive, Teams, or even going to things like our own Storcom cloud file stack. We'd like to touch upon how those things are helping remote workers work together right now, as well as video conferencing for remote workers. Just to kind of discuss today's format, we'll be going through this presentation. At the end, we'll open it up to questions. So that if there's things you want to specifically have answered, we're happy to do that. We'll do that at the end of the presentation. So kind of getting a little background here, right? Obviously, prior to this COVID-19 crisis that we're all dealing with right now, VDI has always been something that's on the forefront of things that people are looking at on how to make a more agile workforce, whether it was an on-premise solution or whether it was for remote workers. People have evaluated, but not necessarily always delve far enough into it to figure out why the benefits will really help the organization, and whether they're just simply, going to look at it as saying it's less expensive or more expensive than buying laptops or desktops. Maybe isn't really the right way to look at this. So we're going to try to dive into that today to look at the cost-benefit analysis of each of the aspects of VDI. VDI can have an amazing TCO, whether you're looking at a large organization where you have thousands of users that are using systems that are relatively similar. There's some definite TCO there, but there's also a TCO that makes sense, that provides a good return on investment when it comes to smaller organizations, it's just a matter of fitting in what the right parameters are to that solution to give you the right return on investment. You know, physical desktop computers with locally installed applications and operating systems at this point really don't make sense for the modern business world. There's better ways to do this. They're expensive. There's maintenance that goes into taking care of them. They're not as secure, and they really lack sufficient support for, you know, the ever-changing business world that we're in today. And that really has come to light with what the current crisis has brought to our attention, which is the ability to scale up very easily. By virtualizing desktops, you have the ability to spin up systems very rapidly. And that was one of the things that became evident to a lot of our clients that became evident to them when they had a need all of a sudden to, you know, suddenly have a requirement to have another 150 people that they weren't expecting to have working remotely. How can they do that rapidly? And virtual desktops really came, you know, kind of to the rescue here, because with desktop as a service and leveraging cloud, that provided a way for them to do this in a cost-effective and also rapid manner. So also part of this, I would say that we'll call the, you know, the new reality of where we're at today is that 92%, according to the FCC, of Americans have high-speed broadband, meaning 25 megabits or faster coming into their home. 89% have some sort of PC. The number is actually higher than that if you look at the fact that people have phones. It's pretty much 100% now, but 89% of all users, all Americans have PCs at home. So that gives us a pretty wide swath of the population to say, okay, even if we don't have a company-owned asset, we have some way for somebody to get onto the internet to get access to potentially a virtual desktop environment. In the past, that may have looked like something you'd never want to have a user do, which is to connect to your own home net from your home PC to your network using a VPN because of the potential security risks. Virtual desktop change all that. Enterprise-grade solutions from the big three providers, Citrix, Nutanix, and VMware, all work on the premise that you can use a you know, any device, any browser type solution where anything can basically connect to these devices so that you can get access to these virtual workspaces. And because of the ability to scale up so rapidly with VDI, that really has helped that process be able to move forward, where we can leverage different technologies from an end user compute standpoint to access these systems. So these are the questions that we really need to be asking ourselves. These are the 7 key points that I think are important, that a lot of the webinars that I've seen have not been touching upon. So this is what we're going to go into next and address each one of these. Real quickly about who we are as Storcom, just to give you a quick background. We're a managed services solution provider. We have our own tier 3 data center, secure private cloud. We've been doing remote workforce for many years now, and we've partnered with what we believe to be the top technology vendors in helping this move forward. So point 1, the question you have to ask is, how much customization will each employee require? That really is kind of the starting point, because that is what determines whether we're going to be using things like a persistent desktop, which is basically a desktop environment where every user has the same look and feel every single time they log in. They make the background blue, it's going to be blue the next time they log in. They're going to have data stored on a home drive locally, it's going to be there the next time they log in. That is completely customized desktop environment that every single time they log in will be theirs. Now, benefit to that is, well, you know, you have the exact same application, you know, set of applications, the exact same look and feel every single time. It's completely customized to your needs. The downside to that is that it's not necessarily leveraging some of the benefits that VDI can bring to the table from the standpoint of standardization, patch management, and being able to easily deploy new systems, because each one of these systems is in essence still acting as its own desktop. It's just simply been virtualized. We have a number of customers that do this because of the fact that they don't have standardization on what each one of their images looks like. So that sometimes maybe the catalyst is that as an organization, you're not ready to do a standardized desktop. But what we do is typically we build out a matrix and say, okay, who in the organization can use persistent? Maybe there's some executives that are going to live in a persistent world, and then customer service department maybe has a different type of application need, and they're going to have non-persistent. In a non-persistent environment, your desktop environment basically gets built each time you log in. This is cost effective from a management standpoint because I can basically deal with a gold image, patched, secured, all from one system. And then each time the user logs in, they get a new session, and when they're done, that session ends and that system gets torn back down again. And in the consumption model, that's also the most cost effective because I'm not keeping unnecessarily resources tied up for a persistent environment. The next question to ask is, how many applications do my remote users, or for that matter, any user in the environment that wants to use VDI, are going to need to have access to? The reason we're asking this question is because of application publishing. Application publishing is where in a virtual workspace environment, I am publishing a specific set of applications, one application or maybe a set of applications, through a portal. I don't have a desktop environment. I come in through my current desktop or laptop and I connect to this portal, and then I just have access to that one or two applications that I need to have access to. So maybe it's a CRM system or your ERP system. That works fine in an environment where there's only a few applications. If there's a whole bunch of applications I need to have access to, probably a desktop environment is going to make more sense. The other thing to keep in mind is that applications that have tie-ins to other applications, an example of this would be the Adobe suite of products use something called the Adobe Cloud login. And when you launch Photoshop, in the background, it launches a browser page and says, okay, I need you to log into the Adobe Cloud. If you're doing application publishing, that doesn't really work because the background web page is missing. So the user gets stuck and they can never actually launch the application. So there are caveats to being able to use application publishing that need to be looked at when you're evaluating whether that makes sense. But if they do, and it's just a single or maybe one or two applications that your users need access to, or maybe it's a third-party vendor that needs access to a certain application inside your environment, it's a great way to keep that controlled. Next is one of the things we talked about at the beginning, any device, any browser. So one of the biggest benefits of the latest technologies from companies like Nutanix and VMware is that they're designed to run on any device as well as any potential browser. This gives us the power to leverage low-cost hardware and deploy them rapidly for high-performance applications. I think a great example of that is a school district that we're doing work with right now that had a need for high-performance CAD and engineering type hardware for classes that their students were taking on learning CAD and CAD/CAM technologies. And instead of deploying expensive, $2,000 laptops, they went the route of using virtual desktop with a high-performance GPU-backed hardware on the back end. And instead, they're now rolling out Chromebooks, which basically are just acting as an HTML5 browser that allows them to get access to this virtual desktop. So now they can control the cost of the hardware. They don't care if the $200 Chromebook gets damaged or lost. It's not a big deal. The back-end infrastructure is all virtualized. So it's a very scalable model from that standpoint. The other thing too is that these technologies also provide a communication channel to your end users through the ability to send messages through these technologies to your users about we're doing patching tonight, or you need to log off in 20 minutes, or whatever the scenario may be. There's a communication channel that allows you to communicate as an administrator through to your end user community about important messages about the business. Next piece we're going to go through is user profiles. This is the other part that, as part of when we do a discovery process of doing consulting and figuring out what the right solution is, We look at, okay, building a matrix on what users are going to need what types of systems. Now, this is different than the persistent versus non-persistent question. This is about what are the hardware requirements going to be needed. A light user is doing basic applications, maybe just a little bit of Word and Excel, maybe a browser, something real simple. Maybe they only need 4 gigs of memory and 2 vCPUs in their VM. A standard Office user maybe needs a little more. They're going to be using a little bit more from a horsepower standpoint, some more memory, some more CPU. So we'll provision those accordingly, and we categorize the number of machines that are going to be needed in those scenarios, so we can figure out what the right hardware requirements are for the underlying hardware systems. Lastly, you got your power users. So one of the things also that the modern VDI solutions are providing is the ability to do high performance graphical based processing for things like CAD and CAM. As I mentioned, we're doing this with the school district. The hosts that are basically being used underneath the hood for these VDI sessions are using a high performance NVIDIA PCI cards that allow for GPU processing. They allow for real-time rendering of CAD and CAM systems. And they're also using protocols that allow you to view this type of graphical data at a speed in which that it performs as well as it would if it was literally sitting on your local machine. The other thing too about GPUs, it's not just about graphics. There's a lot of BI and AI type technologies now that are leveraging them also to do a lot of computational math. So power users are not just people who are running graphical programs. There could be people who are doing, business analytics and so forth. So we have the capabilities now with modern virtual desktop environments to be able to, really go through and provide a overall solution for any type of user. This is another big question that comes up: remote desktop services versus VDI. So what's the difference? Where do I use which one? So remote desktop services, otherwise probably known to you as terminal servers, would be the more standard solution from Microsoft, where basically it's all shared resources. There's no containerization of the virtual environment on a per user basis. Everybody's basically fighting for whatever resources they can get. If I log into a session, I'm accessing the CPU, and if I got 100 other users accessing that same system, they're all accessing that same CPU. If an errant process occurs on user A, it can take out the entire CPU pool to the point where everybody else is affected by that. In a VDI environment, that doesn't occur that way, because just like in your virtual servers, everything has been containerized. You have protected memory and protected CPU, as well as storage. So VDI is much more controlled. So remote desktop services is fine for a very specific use case where you have basically maybe a customer service department accessing a browser for an internal portal. Great use case. It's very easy to deploy, cost effective because the licensing costs less than simply rolling out 100 Windows 10 licenses, but it doesn't really have the same capabilities as a true VDI solution. Virtual desktop is completely customizable. Also has the ability to use, as we said, high performance CAD CAM technologies, because I can allocate specific hardware resources to those virtual desktops. One other caveat about RDS to point out is that it's running a Windows Server operating system. If the application you are trying to run doesn't run on Windows Server, it won't work. And there are applications that you will find that although Windows 10 and Windows 2016 are the same kernel, Windows 10 will get Windows 2016 will flag it, and the application won't run. And those are examples where you're definitely not going to be able to use RDS. So really comes down to understanding again, what's the use case? What am I trying to accomplish here? Security. So this in itself obviously could be an entire presentation, which it's going to be on the next session. But just in reference to security in regards to VDI, let's just talk about the real big benefit. So why is the VDI environment more secure? Well, because you are not connecting directly from your virtual desktop. I'm sorry, you're not connecting directly from your external device that's connecting to the virtual desktop, whether it's a PC at home, your own home PC, a laptop from work, whatever it may be. you're not connecting directly through from that to your network. You're going from your PC via HTTPS to a portal of some sort. And then from there, no VPN, from there, you're then going to connect to the session. The session will be your virtual desktop. The virtual desktop launches, and then it will then have access to your network and your data. From an example of, let's just say, the Storecom private cloud, we would have a point-to-point VPN between our site and your site, and your connection to the portal does not require a VPN. So we're not actually tunneling all the way through from your location to the company data. And we're basically monitoring and making sure that we have a secure connection between the two sites. So you've removed that potential risk. So if there's malware on your home PC, in theory, it shouldn't be able to get onto corporate data. Now, obviously, if you're connected through O365 and you're opening up email and you're moving things around that way, yeah, that can still happen. But it's not coming directly from your home PC, because your home PC does not have direct access to the internal network. So much more secure from that standpoint, but we still do need to think about some other security questions. So real quickly at a high level, authentication. How am I going to authenticate? So users connect to this portal. What happens then? Am I using domain-based Active Directory for authentication? Am I using Microsoft ADFS through O365? Am I using external LDAP or G Suite? As well as I can integrate with third-party MFA solutions like, for providing multi-factor authentication. So all of those things there's capabilities there built into these solutions. We have to just figure out what's going to be the right methodology. Endpoint protection, still extremely important. On these virtual desktops, you need some type of endpoint protection. One of our partners, Carbon Black from VMware, is a great application that's cloud-based that allows you to still secure those virtual desktops. And it means that you don't necessarily need as strong of a product on the compute side of the end user, because I'm really trying to protect what's going on that virtual desktop more than anything else. The other thing is secure remote management. With a VDI solution, I have the capability to wipe an operating system if something goes wrong with it. There's a corruption or whatever it may be. In the event of a user at home with a laptop, that they lose their laptop, or the laptop gets damaged or it gets corrupted or whatever it may be, your options become limited, especially today in the current climate where it's very difficult to get access to people. They are stuck. They're going to have to have somebody ship out a new laptop with the applications installed. If you just simply have a dumb terminal sitting in essence at home, a cheap laptop that they're using at their own house, you could send out another one of those and just tell them to reconnect to the virtual portal so they get to their VDI session. We don't have to worry as much about what's happening on the actual end user laptop or compute environment. The last thing too, we mentioned is microsegmentation is something that we would recommend in a VDI deployment leveraging. So what we do is we use microsegmentation to make sure that we can lock down within a client environment lateral traffic. So if there's corruption or virus or malware occurring on one VDI session, we can stop it from moving laterally between systems. Again, this is something much harder to control if I'm using laptops that are connected through a VPN. Lastly, would be the financial model. So obviously one of the biggest factors right now is what are the cost of all this? VDI and especially desktops as a service have a very good financial model right now, because I'm able to scale up very easily to meet the current demands and potentially scale back down when all this stuff hopefully dies down here. But it also allows you to build a model where I can use a consumption-based model for my desktop resources. Deploy cheap hardware to the end users, deploy what my end users need from a compute standpoint on premise or in a cloud solution, would provide you the capabilities from a compute standpoint to be able to control that better than providing more expensive laptops and giving those out to all these different users who don't necessarily need them, or maybe it's harder to move them around. It's very easy for me to take a user who was maybe a basic user 1 week and then get promoted into a general office user, I can easily upgrade their system versus changing out hardware for them may be more costly or more difficult. So building an on-premise solution is obviously always an option, but doing desktop as a service right now makes a lot of sense because it's an operating expense versus a capital expense. One note on this from a financial standpoint to point out is that both Nutanix and VMware have very flexible licensing models that allow for a hybrid approach so that you can do desktop as a service today and then potentially take those licenses and move those into an on-prem environment. And when and if that time becomes, the right time, you can move those licenses around as needed. But I think that the finances behind virtual desktop are really one of the main catalysts of why people are looking at this so closely. This slide just kind of goes over kind of our methodology for building out a solution, doing a discovery phase where we do data gathering and application classification, understanding the performance requirements, and then from there we build out, as we talked about, some of these things around building out matrices and understanding system sizing and analyzing the workloads to build out solutions, and typically coming back with a good, better, best approach to what these requirements are driven will kind of help us provide what the right solutions will look like. Here I just want to show kind of real quickly, this is an example using the Storecon private cloud, but this also can be done leveraging public cloud too. Basically here what we're showing is how users are coming in, they're authenticating using an HTML5 browser through some type of launch pad. Here's a secure channel into the environment. What they see is the image of the virtual desktop being presented back to them using high performance protocols. Typically, most of all the big three technology vendors that are playing in this space are all developed their own protocols different than remote desktop protocol that are far more efficient in displaying data back to the end user. And what this allows is them to have access to this VDI environment. The VDI environment then is protected, secured, and potentially using endpoint protection, and also then has access into your network via a site-to-site VPN, which will allow for potentially for AD replication if you want to do local domain authentication, as well as we also have things like we have our own file share option for putting data on site and keeping it closer to the virtual desktops. I mean, this site-to-site VPN is basically the link between the two sites. So depending on what the workload is, that is one factor that has to be taken into account, how much in performance you need to have and how big a pipe that's going to be. So in general, that kind of summarizes where we're at today with virtual desktop and virtual workspace. I wanted to just give this again as a high level overview. I thought I'd open this up to any potential questions and see if anybody has any questions they'd like to ask specific to this. Hopefully we were able to cover in 30 minutes. It's a fair amount of material, but try to go through most of it and let's give some insight here. Are there any questions at this point that anybody would like to ask? And if not, we'll stay on here for a few minutes and see if there's any questions that anybody would ask, but I'd like to thank everybody for coming, and hopefully you'll be able to tune into the next in our series, which is securing remote workers. And thank you again, everyone, for attending. Okay, I see one. I think there's a question somebody's trying to ask, but they have to type it into the question box. I see somebody did raise their hand. Okay, so somebody asked a question about school environments. So I think that's a good question. So obviously, remote working for school environments, especially with e-learning that's going on today, most important thing is understanding what that workload is going to look like. So the first questions we're going to have to do is go back to what we started with those that matrix of light users, medium users, and power users, right? What kind of users are these people going to be? These are students. Are they going to just be doing connecting to an online portal to do Blackboard, which is a online enrollment system, or are they going to be doing, as we gave an example, CAD and CAM? Building out that matrix is going to be the first part of the process, and then understand how we can then leverage desktop as a service. Desktop as a service obviously makes sense for school environment, especially because you probably only have certain hours of the day that these students are going to be accessing this hardware. So why pay for hardware that's being, that's not going to be used, probably 75% of the time? Using desktop as a service probably makes a lot more sense. Somebody else asked a good question. So does each VDI session need its own Windows license? Yes. Now there's a BYO licensing agreement that Microsoft provides. So that is one of the differences between RDS and VDI. VDI, in essence, is a virtual desktop, so you need to have a desktop license. RDS is Windows 2016 server. Let's just use that as an example. And then there's user CALs that get purchased. Now there are options around that, and there's ways to streamline that licensing process. And Microsoft does provide less expensive options when they are virtual. That would be something that we could certainly talk about and discuss the options there. But short answer is yes. Each session does need a Windows license. Yes, we will be presenting out. We will send out the PowerPoint presentation for anybody who'd like to read this, and we'll also have the same information will be on our website and our blog. So, okay, well, everybody, thank you very much. I appreciate everybody attending, and thanks for the questions. It was very helpful. Hopefully, we're able to answer everything. Have a good day and stay safe.